You're too set in your ways for modern technology, Bernard. We need fresh blood who understands innovation. The words hit me like a freight train as I sat across from CEO Victoria Castellanos in the glass-walled conference room of Meridian Financial Systems. After 35 years of building this company's entire technological backbone from the ground up, this was how it ended. Not with recognition or gratitude, but with a corporate buzzword execution disguised as strategic restructuring. My name is Bernard Ashworth, and at 63 years old, I had just been fired from the company I helped transform from a small regional bank into a multi-billion-dollar financial powerhouse. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman calling me outdated was sitting behind a laptop running software I had personally architected, in a building whose entire digital infrastructure existed because of systems I designed when she was still in middle school. I joined Meridian's IT department in 1989 when we had 3 branch locations and kept customer records in filing cabinets. The founder, Douglas Meridian Jr., hired me fresh out of Carnegie Mellon with a computer science degree and dreams of revolutionizing how small banks operated. Back then, our cutting-edge technology was a shared computer terminal that printed customer statements on perforated paper. Over 3.5 decades, I watched Meridian grow into a regional giant with 247 branches across the Southeast. I built our first online banking platform in 1995, years before most banks even understood what the internet was. When mobile banking emerged, I designed the security protocols that still protect every transaction today. During the 2008 financial crisis, while other banks collapsed under system failures and security breaches, Meridian's infrastructure never wavered because I had built redundancies and safeguards that anticipated disasters others couldn't imagine. But sitting in that conference room, watching Victoria flip through slides about digital transformation and agile methodologies, I realized none of that mattered anymore. It wasn't about competence or results. It was about age, perception, and the dangerous assumption that newer always means better. Victoria's presentation continued with corporate slides filled with buzzwords I'd been hearing for months. Digital natives, cloud-first architecture, AI-driven solutions, the kind of language consultants use to justify expensive mistakes. She had hired Nexus Tech Solutions, a Silicon Valley firm promising to revolutionize Meridian's technological landscape with their proprietary Cloud Vault platform. "Bernard, we appreciate your decades of service," she said, not making eye contact. "But the banking industry is evolving rapidly. Our customers expect seamless digital experiences, real-time processing, and innovative fintech integrations. The new platform requires a different mindset, someone who thinks in terms of microservices and containerized deployments, not legacy mainframe architectures." Legacy mainframe architectures. She was referring to the system that processed over 2.3 million transactions daily without a single security breach in 15 years. The same system that handled regulatory compliance across 12 states and integrated with 247 different financial institutions. The infrastructure that had earned Meridian recognition as most secure regional bank for 7 consecutive years. I could have explained how Cloud Vault's standard configurations would struggle with our custom regulatory reporting modules, how the migration would require careful preservation of transaction histories dating back decades, how our fraud detection algorithms, which I'd refined through thousands of real-world cases, existed nowhere in their documentation because they were built through years of responding to actual threats. Instead, I simply nodded. "You're probably right, Victoria. Banking technology is certainly changing rapidly." Something in my calm response seemed to catch her off guard. She had prepared for arguments, for desperate pleas from the old guard trying to protect his territory. Instead, she got acceptance. "Well," she continued, her tone softening slightly, "I'm glad you understand. Human resources will handle the transition details. We'll need comprehensive documentation of all your systems before your departure next Friday." I stood up, straightened my tie, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, I turned back one last time. "Victoria, when you implement Cloud Vault, make sure someone understands the regulatory compliance integrations. They're more complex than they appear in any manual." She was already looking at her phone, dismissing my advice with a wave. That was when I knew this was going to hurt her far more than it hurt me. The next morning, I arrived at my office for what would be my final week at Meridian. Word travels fast in corporate environments, and I could feel the sympathetic glances from colleagues who had worked with me for years. Sarah Chen, my deputy director, knocked on my door around 10 a.m. "Bernard, I can't believe they're doing this," she said, closing the door behind her. "Everyone knows you built this place. The Nexus consultants have been asking me questions about systems I've never even heard of." I looked up from my computer where I was reviewing 35 years of technical documentation. "What kind of questions?" "They want to know about something called the Heritage Protocol and why customer accounts from our 1991 acquisition of Mountain Trust Bank have different data structures. I told them you'd know, but they said they're handling the migration without legacy consultation." The Heritage Protocol. I had built that 15 years ago when we discovered that Mountain Trust's customer data contained encoding inconsistencies that could corrupt account balances during routine maintenance. It was a complex validation layer that ran invisibly in the background, checking and correcting data integrity issues that could have cost customers millions in misprocessed transactions. It wasn't documented in any manual because it was an emergency fix that became permanent infrastructure. The Nexus team would never find it in their automated discovery tools. "Sarah, they'll figure it out," I said calmly. "Cloud Vault is a sophisticated platform. I'm sure they have protocols for data migration challenges." She looked puzzled by my response. "But shouldn't we tell them about the Heritage Protocol? And what about the regulatory compliance engine you built for the OCC examinations?" I turned back to my computer screen. "I'm documenting everything that's officially part of Meridian's systems architecture. If there are undocumented customizations, those were emergency solutions that fell outside standard development procedures." Sarah stared at me for a moment, then slowly began to understand. The distinction between official systems and the hundreds of custom fixes, patches, and enhancements that kept everything running smoothly was becoming clear. "I see," she said quietly. "You're documenting exactly what they asked for." "Exactly what they asked for," I confirmed. By Thursday afternoon, I had completed my handover documentation. A comprehensive 127-page manual covering every officially recognized system component at Meridian Financial: database schemas, user access protocols, backup procedures, network configurations, and integration points with external vendors. Everything a competent systems administrator could find in the standard file directories and configuration databases. The Nexus consultants, led by a confident 28-year-old named Trevor Blackstone, scheduled a final walkthrough meeting. Trevor had an MBA from Stanford and spoke fluently about synergistic cloud ecosystems and blockchain-enabled transaction frameworks. He treated our meeting like a formality. "Bernard, thanks for putting together this documentation," he said, flipping through the printed manual. "Cloud Vault's AI-assisted migration tools should handle most of the heavy lifting. We've successfully migrated over 200 financial institutions to our platform." "I'm sure you have," I replied. "Cloud Vault seems like a solid platform for standard banking operations." Trevor nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. We're moving away from these custom legacy solutions toward industry-standard best practices, much more maintainable in the long run." Victoria joined us for the final portion of the meeting. "Trevor, how confident are you about the migration timeline? We're telling customers to expect seamless service throughout the transition." "Absolutely confident," Trevor replied. "Our platform handles all major banking functions out of the box. We'll have you fully operational on Cloud Vault within 72 hours of cutover." I looked at both of them. Victoria with her faith in expensive consultants, Trevor with his confidence in one-size-fits-all solutions. Then I offered my final piece of advice. "Trevor, when you're testing the migration, pay special attention to the customer accounts from our historical acquisitions. Some of the older data structures have unique characteristics." Trevor waved dismissively. "Our platform automatically normalizes legacy data formats. That's one of Cloud Vault's key features." "Of course," I said. "I'm sure it handles most situations perfectly." The emphasis on most went completely unnoticed. As I packed my personal items that evening, I looked around the office where I had spent over half my life. Then I made one final entry in my personal notes, a detailed map of every undocumented system, every emergency fix, every custom protocol that existed in the shadows of Meridian's official architecture. Not for them. For me. My final Friday at Meridian was eerily quiet. The Nexus team was busy in the main server room, running their automated discovery tools and preparing for the weekend migration. Victoria had sent a company-wide email announcing the exciting technological advancement that would position Meridian as a forward-thinking leader in digital banking. I spent the day carefully organizing my departure. The 127-page documentation sat on Trevor's desk, containing everything officially required for the handover. What it didn't contain were the dozens of background processes that I had built over the years, the silent guardians that prevented the kinds of catastrophic failures that could destroy a bank overnight. The fraud pattern recognition engine that I had trained through 15 years of actual attack patterns wasn't mentioned because it operated through undocumented API calls. The regulatory compliance buffer that automatically flagged suspicious transactions before they could trigger federal investigations existed in a directory that no standard scan would find. The cross-platform data integrity checker that prevented account corruption during high-volume processing periods was woven so deeply into the system architecture that it appeared to be standard database maintenance. These weren't oversights. They were the difference between a banking system that functioned flawlessly and one that would collapse under real-world pressure. At 3 p.m., I received a call from Marcus Hoffman, CEO of Atlantic Trust Bank, one of our primary competitors. Marcus and I had known each other for 20 years through industry conferences and regulatory meetings. "Bernard, I heard about Meridian's decision. That's their loss. We've been looking for someone to head up our technology modernization initiative. Interested in a conversation?" I looked out my office window at the Meridian parking lot for the last time. "Marcus, I think I might be ready for a new challenge." "Excellent. Can you start Monday? We'll match whatever Victoria was paying you, plus a 40% increase and full autonomy over technical decisions." "I'll be there." As I left my badge on the security desk and walked out of Meridian Financial for the final time, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. After 35 years of being the person who fixed everything, I was finally free to watch someone else try. Monday morning found me in Atlantic Trust's downtown headquarters, meeting with their executive team. Marcus had been honest about their challenges. They were a solid regional bank with good customer relationships, but outdated technology that was limiting their growth. Unlike Victoria's obsession with flashy buzzwords, Marcus wanted practical solutions that actually worked. "Bernard, we don't need to be the most innovative bank in the Southeast," Marcus explained during our first strategy meeting. "We need to be the most reliable. Our customers trust us because we don't surprise them with system failures or security breaches." It was refreshing to work with leadership that understood the difference between innovation and stability. Atlantic Trust's existing systems were indeed outdated, but they were well documented and properly maintained. Building improvements on solid foundations was infinitely easier than trying to fix the technological chaos I knew was brewing at Meridian. Meanwhile, my phone had been unusually quiet. No calls from former colleagues, no questions about system configurations, no emergency requests for clarification. The Nexus migration was apparently proceeding according to plan. Sarah Chen texted me Tuesday afternoon. "Migration went live this morning. Everything looks smooth so far. Trevor seems pretty happy with himself." I wasn't surprised. The first 24 to 48 hours after a major system migration usually went well if you were only running basic operations. The real tests would come when the system faced peak loads, unusual transaction patterns, or the kind of edge cases that revealed the difference between laboratory conditions and real-world banking. Wednesday passed without incident, then Thursday. By Friday, I was beginning to think that perhaps I had overestimated the complexity of Meridian's customizations. Maybe Cloud Vault really could handle everything through standard configurations. That weekend, I spent time in my home workshop, restoring a 1967 Mustang that I had been neglecting for years. There was something satisfying about working with my hands, solving mechanical problems that had clear solutions and predictable outcomes. Unlike software systems, classic cars didn't pretend to be smarter than their designers. On Sunday evening, as I was cleaning my tools and preparing for another week at Atlantic Trust, my phone finally rang. The caller ID showed James Morrison, one of Meridian's senior developers. "Bernard, we have a problem." I set down my wrench and walked inside, away from the Mustang's engine noise. "What kind of problem, James?" "The automatic regulatory reporting failed this weekend. The OCC compliance engine that generates our weekly suspicious activity reports hasn't run since the migration. Trevor says it's just a configuration issue, but I can't find any documentation about how it's supposed to work." I sat down at my kitchen table, remembering the countless hours I had spent building that particular system. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency required weekly reports on specific transaction patterns that could indicate money laundering or fraud. Missing those reports would trigger federal attention within days. "What error messages are you seeing?" That's the strange part. There are no error messages. The system acts like the compliance engine doesn't exist. Trevor ran a full platform audit and couldn't find any trace of it in Cloud Vault's modules. Of course he couldn't. The compliance engine operated through a series of interconnected scripts that pulled data from multiple sources, applied pattern recognition algorithms I had developed through years of regulatory feedback, and generated reports in the specific format that OCC examiners expected. It existed in the spaces between official systems, invisible to automated discovery tools. "James, did you check the legacy documentation I provided?" "I've read through all 127 pages twice. There's mention of regulatory compliance modules, but nothing specific about the weekly OCC reporting engine." I looked out my kitchen window at the evening sky. The weekly reporting system was an emergency implementation during the 2019 regulatory review. It was designed as a temporary solution until we could integrate proper compliance tools into the main platform, but it's been running for 5 years. Sometimes temporary solutions become permanent infrastructure. I documented all the official compliance modules. If there are additional reporting systems, they would need to be rebuilt according to current regulatory requirements. James was quiet for a moment. "Bernard, we need those reports by Wednesday or the OCC is going to start asking questions. Can you help us rebuild the system?" I thought about my new colleagues at Atlantic Trust, the clean architecture we were building, the management team that valued expertise over politics. "James, I don't work for Meridian anymore. If you need consulting assistance, you'll need to go through proper channels." After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and returned to the Mustang. Some problems were worth solving. Others were worth watching unfold. Monday morning brought a series of increasingly urgent calls that I didn't answer. By Tuesday, the voicemails had escalated from polite requests to barely controlled panic. James called 6 times. Sarah called twice. Even Trevor Blackstone left a message asking for clarification on some undocumented legacy processes. I was in a meeting with Atlantic Trust's loan department when my phone rang with a call I couldn't ignore. Victoria Castellanos herself. "Excuse me for just a moment," I told the loan officers, and stepped into the hallway. "Bernard, we need to talk." Victoria's voice was strained. "The OCC compliance system has completely failed, and Trevor's team can't locate the source code." I documented all official compliance systems in my handover materials, I replied calmly. "This isn't about what's documented. We have federal regulators asking why our suspicious activity reports haven't been filed. Trevor says you built some kind of shadow system that's not part of the standard platform architecture." I walked to Atlantic Trust's break room for privacy. "Victoria, the weekly OCC reporting was an emergency solution implemented during a regulatory review. It was never integrated into the official system architecture because it was meant to be temporary. 5 years isn't temporary. Sometimes emergency fixes become permanent infrastructure. It's a common occurrence in complex systems." Her voice cracked slightly. "Bernard, we could face millions in regulatory fines if we don't get this fixed immediately. The OCC is threatening a full compliance audit." A full compliance audit meant federal examiners would spend weeks crawling through every aspect of Meridian's operations, looking for other failures and weaknesses. It was the kind of attention that destroyed management careers and sent stock prices plummeting. "I understand the severity," I said. "My consulting rate is $300 per hour, with a minimum 80-hour engagement to account for the complexity of regulatory reconstruction. $24,000 to fix a reporting system, to rebuild a regulatory compliance system from scratch under federal deadline pressure. If you prefer to work with the Nexus consultants, that's your choice." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. We'll discuss it and get back to you." She hung up without saying goodbye. I returned to my meeting with Atlantic Trust's loan department, where we were designing sensible technology improvements that enhanced rather than replaced working systems. Wednesday morning brought news that sent shockwaves through the regional banking industry. The Federal Reserve had placed Meridian Financial under enhanced supervisory oversight due to significant compliance system failures. In banking terms, this was one step away from regulatory intervention that could force management changes or even threaten the bank's charter. My phone rang continuously. Victoria called every 2 hours. Trevor Blackstone left increasingly frantic voicemails admitting that Cloud Vault's standard compliance modules couldn't replicate the sophisticated pattern recognition that Meridian's system had provided. Even board members I had met over the years were calling, begging me to reconsider. The most desperate call came Thursday afternoon from Douglas Meridian III, grandson of the bank's founder and chairman of the board of directors. "Bernard, this is Doug Meridian. I know we haven't spoken directly in years, but I need to appeal to you personally. 4 generations of my family built this bank. We cannot let it fail because of a technology migration gone wrong." I had always respected Doug. Unlike Victoria, he understood that Meridian's success came from the people who built it, not the consultants who promised to improve it. "Doug, I appreciate you calling personally. This is a difficult situation. What would it take to bring you back? Not as a consultant, as Chief Technology Officer with complete authority over all technical decisions. Name your salary, your terms, whatever you need." I looked around Atlantic Trust's offices, where I had spent the week designing elegant solutions with colleagues who valued experience, clean systems, proper documentation, management that understood the difference between innovation and reckless disruption. "Doug, I've accepted a position elsewhere. I'm building something new, something better. I can't abandon that commitment. What if we terminated the Nexus contract? What if we gave you unlimited budget to fix everything properly?" It was tempting. The vindication of returning as the savior, the satisfaction of proving that experience mattered more than expensive consultants. But I had learned something important over the past week. Sometimes the best revenge was simply moving forward. "I'm sorry, Doug. Meridian made their choice about the value of institutional knowledge. I've made mine about where to invest my remaining career." The silence on the line spoke volumes. "I understand," he said finally. "For what it's worth, Bernard, this was never my decision. Victoria convinced the board that modernization required fresh leadership. We were wrong. I know you were, Doug. I hope you find a solution." Friday brought the news I had been expecting. The OCC had imposed immediate restrictions on Meridian's operations, limiting their ability to process certain types of transactions until compliance systems could be verified and restored. For a bank that processed over $2 billion in daily transactions, it was a death sentence delivered in bureaucratic language. Victoria called one final time, her voice barely controlled. "Bernard, I'm prepared to offer you whatever it takes. Full reinstatement as CTO, $400,000 salary, complete technical autonomy, and Trevor's immediate termination. We'll terminate the entire Nexus contract and rebuild everything exactly as you designed it." I was sitting in my home office, reviewing proposals for Atlantic Trust's technology modernization, clean, well-planned improvements that would enhance customer service without destroying proven systems. Work that mattered, with people who understood its value. "Victoria, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in returning to Meridian." "Not interested? Bernard, this is your life's work. You built this company's entire technological foundation." "You're right, I did build it. And you decided it was outdated, along with the person who created it. I've moved on to building something better." "Something better where?" I smiled, thinking about the conversation I'd had with Marcus that morning. Atlantic Trust was planning to acquire two smaller regional banks, whose technology infrastructure had been damaged by failed modernization attempts. Banks whose executives had been seduced by the same kinds of expensive consultants who had convinced Victoria that newer was always better. Victoria, that's confidential. But I will say this. There are a lot of regional banks who are discovering that flashy consultants and cloud-first platforms aren't substitutes for solid engineering and institutional knowledge. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Bernard, please, I'm asking you personally, help us save the bank. The bank can still be saved. You just need to find someone who understands the systems I built well enough to rebuild them from scratch. I'm sure there are plenty of digital natives who can figure it out. I hung up the phone and returned to designing the future of regional banking, one that valued experience, stability, and the wisdom that came from solving real problems rather than chasing technological fashion. Monday morning brought the announcement that shook the entire southeastern banking industry. Heritage Financial Group, one of the region's largest bank holding companies, had made an offer to acquire Meridian Financial Systems in what industry analysts were calling a distressed asset purchase. The offer valued Meridian at barely 40% of their worth just 6 months earlier. Victoria Castellanos had been relieved of her duties by the board of directors, and Douglas Meridian III was desperately trying to find alternative solutions to avoid the family losing control of their 4-generation legacy. Trevor Blackstone and his Nexus consulting team had been terminated, but not before submitting a final bill of $2.3 million for comprehensive system migration services. Their Cloud Vault platform was still running Meridian's basic operations, but without the sophisticated background processes that had made the bank truly competitive, it was essentially an expensive way to process simple transactions. Marcus Hoffman knocked on my office door at Atlantic Trust that afternoon, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing a grin I'd rarely seen from the normally serious banker. Bernard, you're going to love this. Heritage Financial just called. They want to hire Atlantic Trust as their technology consulting partner for the Meridian acquisition. Apparently, they've heard we have someone who understands complex banking systems. I looked up from my computer where I was designing security protocols that would actually enhance rather than replace proven systems. That's quite a coincidence. The best part? They want us to evaluate which of Meridian's technological assets are worth preserving and which should be completely rebuilt. They specifically asked for the architect who understands how regional banks actually operate. I thought about the irony. After 35 years of building Meridian's technological foundation, I would now be the one deciding which pieces were worth saving and which should be scrapped. The ultimate vindication. Being hired to judge the value of my own work. Marcus, I think I'd be interested in that project. But I have one condition. Name it. I want to interview the entire former Meridian development team. Good people got caught in the middle of bad management decisions. They deserve better opportunities. Marcus nodded. Consider it done. Sarah Chen already called asking about positions. Apparently word is spreading that we value experience over buzzwords. That evening I called Doug Meridian personally. It was a conversation I owed him. Doug, I heard about the Heritage acquisition offer. I'm sorry it came to this. Bernard, I won't lie to you. We're devastated. 4 generations of building something meaningful, destroyed by one bad decision about technological modernization. The Meridian name doesn't have to disappear. Heritage is planning to maintain the regional brand identity. Your family's legacy will continue. But not under our control. No, but under the control of people who understand that banking technology should enhance customer service, not replace human judgment with algorithmic guesswork. Doug was quiet for a moment. Will you be involved in the transition? Atlantic Trust has been asked to consult on preserving the valuable technological assets. I'll make sure that everything worth saving gets properly documented and maintained. That means a lot, Bernard, thank you. 6 months later, I stood in the main server room of what was now Heritage Meridian Financial, watching my team install the final components of our modernized banking platform. It was everything that Meridian's original architecture could have become with proper planning, adequate resources, and leadership that understood the difference between innovation and destruction. Sarah Chen, now Atlantic Trust's deputy CTO, looked up from her laptop where she was running final integration tests. "Bernard, the Heritage Protocol is online and functioning perfectly. Customer accounts from all 3 acquired banks are processing normally, and the regulatory compliance systems are generating clean reports." The Heritage Protocol, a name I had chosen deliberately. It represented everything that the original Meridian migration should have been: careful preservation of valuable institutional knowledge, gradual modernization that enhanced rather than replaced proven systems, and respect for the complexity that came from decades of real-world operation. Heritage Financial's acquisition of Meridian had become a case study taught in business schools about the dangers of prioritizing technological fashion over functional competence. Victoria Castellanos' career in banking had effectively ended. She was now working for a software startup where her enthusiasm for buzzwords was considered an asset rather than a liability. Trevor Blackstone's Nexus consulting firm had lost 3 major clients after word spread about the Meridian disaster. CloudVault's reputation in the banking industry had been permanently damaged by their inability to handle the complex requirements of established financial institutions. Douglas Meridian III had been appointed to Heritage Financial's board of directors, where his family's institutional knowledge was valued and preserved. The Meridian name remained on branch offices throughout the Southeast, but now it represented stable innovation rather than reckless disruption. My phone rang as I was reviewing the final system performance reports. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Bernard Ashworth. "Mr. Ashworth, this is Patricia Williams, CEO of Coastal Banking Group. We've heard about your work with the Heritage Meridian transition. We're facing some technology challenges of our own and would appreciate a consultation." I smiled, looking around the server room where decades of banking wisdom had been preserved, enhanced, and prepared for another generation of service. "I'd be happy to discuss it, Patricia, but I should warn you. I believe in building systems that last rather than chasing technological trends." "Mr. Ashworth, that's exactly why we're calling." As I scheduled the meeting and hung up the phone, I realized that this was what true vindication looked like. Not the dramatic confrontation or public humiliation that revenge fantasies promised, but the quiet satisfaction of building something better and watching the industry recognize its value. Experience hadn't been replaced by innovation. It had been revealed as innovation's most essential foundation.